leader in the MOOC initiative at Penn State, and he's lent his more than 20 years of experience in online and technology-based education to our MOOC efforts. We're also lucky enough to have with us today Annie Taylor. Annie is the director of the John A. Dutton E-Education Institute in the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences here at Penn State. Annie's worked in the field of distance education since 1991 and is responsible for guiding the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences strategic vision and planning for online learning. So, with no further ado, Matt and Annie, take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to jump right in because I know Matt and I are actually in different rooms. But Matt, I'll let you kick us off and we'll just tag team it from there.
Sounds great, Annie. So what I wanted to do is just welcome everyone. This is the planning a MOOC phase of our MOOC by Design series, and what we're going to do is really share the experiences that my team's encountered and also what Annie's encountered, and we're going to talk about, yes, we're going to talk about planning. We're also going to spend quite a bit of time talking about expectations, things you can expect during the planning and some parts of the execution of a MOOC, and hopefully that'll be a nice tie-in for the other sessions throughout the rest of the week when it comes to design, development, delivery, and assessment of MOOCs. So again, as Brad said at the kickoff here, feel free to kick in with any questions as we start to move through the presentation. We'll address them sometimes right then and there, and sometimes we might have to push them off a little bit, but we will try to answer all the questions. So you know, I'm the manager of instructional design development within the Education Technology Services here at Penn State. So my role in this was in the first 5 MOOCs that were developed by Penn State last year. My team was responsible centrally for being heavily involved in 3 of them. And Annie can kind of come in with, she's the director of the Dutton Institute for E-Education in the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences. And Annie, you can talk about your experiences.
Yeah, and then I'll kind of kick us off into the beginning. So as Matt said, we launched 5 MOOCs here last year, and the unit that I lead at Penn State was responsible for 2 of those 5. So I have a couple experiences to personally share. I am an administrator and a faculty member running an institute that does nothing but design, develop, and manage, administer online programs. So doing MOOCs fit right into our wheelhouse. But why don't we, Matt, take it from there. I'll just dive right in. I know that it would help, I'm sure it would help if we kind of set the stage. So let me do that. I just realized I went to the next slide on my machine, but it helps if you all can see that. There we go. So just to get you started, a little background on why we even did this at Penn State. You know, we really had an interest, and we'll look at our timeline in a moment, at looking at ways to get engaged with the MOOC movement. Penn State, as many of you know, it had a long and rich history in distance education, starting in 1897 with the Pony Express, believe it or not. And certainly being right there and ready to jump in with online teaching and learning in the late 90s. When MOOCs came onto the scene and really started to get a lot of interest internationally, Penn State saw that there were a lot of opportunities for us, and I've listed some of them here. We do have many online degree and certificate programs already available at a distance through our World Campus, which is our online component of Penn State. We had more than 90 degree and certificate programs available that way, so perhaps MOOCs would be a nice way to promote those. We also wanted to increase applications and enrollments on our physical campuses, and we thought it could be a neat way to test some new markets for courses and programs that we might want to consider offering through our more traditional online offerings. We also knew it would be a great way to promote the research strengths of the university, a great way to re-engage our alumni. We boast the largest dues-paying alumni association in the world. We have a lot of Penn State alum around the globe, and this would be a fun way to be able to re-engage with them on some fun and interesting topics. We also saw it as an incredible way to do research and experiment with innovative pedagogy, try things out that we hadn't tried at scale or that we just thought would be fascinating to try, period, and potentially incorporate back into our traditional online and even our face-to-face, and a great way to reach new audiences. So a quick look at our timeline, just to again set the stage. We began in October of 2012 by forming a MOOC strategy group. This was relatively ad hoc, but quickly formalized into a group of interested faculty, administrators, and staff from around the university who were wanting to look into exploring potential involvement with MOOCs. By January of 2013, we had convinced ourselves and the university that this is definitely something we wanted to do. We'd begun discussions with Coursera. We had selected Coursera as the partner we wanted to begin with. And we identified those 5 MOOCs that Matt and I keep mentioning that we wanted to develop. In February of 2013, we formally and publicly announced our partnership with Coursera. And we launched our first MOOC, which was the Art MOOC that Matt and I have mentioned, in June of 2013. And the rest of the MOOCs were launched thereafter, with the last of the 5 being launched this January. In September of last year, an executive committee of our university's leadership looked over everything that we've been doing to that point and made some recommendations for how we would proceed in the future. They did decide they wanted to continue and do more in the MOOC realm, and so they developed an RFP process, which was how we would decide what MOOCs to do in the future. And we'll look at that more closely later. In 2014, in the beginning of the year, we formed a subgroup called the MOOC Directions to start looking at things like, what do we want to do next? Not just what MOOCs, but are there other platforms we want to explore, other partners, other types of massive online courses, and so forth. And in February, kind of parallel to that, we did select the next round of MOOCs, another 3 MOOCs that we were developing from scratch, as well as several MOOCs that we will offer again, including our Maps and the Geospatial Revolution MOOC. So I just wanted to set that stage, and Matt, I'll turn it over to you, and we can start diving into the planning process.
Okay, thanks, Annie. That's great. So yeah, that setup, was what Penn State was thinking and what we were doing and how we move forward. So whenever I talk to anyone about MOOCs, and no matter how much we want to talk about the process and the design, the first thing that comes up, this is the last couple of conferences I've been to, is, okay, let's get down to it. How much does it cost to make one of these things? And I've recently been involved with conversations with the universities that have said that they can make MOOCs for $7,000. And then I've heard that there are MOOCs out there, this is unconfirmed, that there are MOOCs that have cost universities $1 million. So I'll kind of let that sink in for a moment, because I'm not going to talk about the cost, because as it turns out, no one's financial accounting system or project accounting system works the same. How costs are incurred or allocated are different, even within groups here at Penn State. I think Annie can definitely attest to that. So I'm not going to talk about the cost, because I want to come back to an area that is a lot easier to discuss around the effort that goes into MOOCs. So I want to talk about setting expectations in time. So if your organization is interested in going down the path of developing a MOOC, and you can obviously develop your own set of reasons and your path and your own perhaps even university strategy for doing so. I'll talk about time a little bit just to get your attention as to the type of effort you can expect. So I'll give an example. Now this, the first book we're going to talk about was the Energy MOOC, and this came out of Annie's college in EMS. And Annie, can you just share with everyone the basics of the design before I ask people to take a guess at what the total hours to design, develop, and deliver were?
Absolutely. So this MOOC was, it was to span 8 weeks. It was to be delivered over 8 weeks and be roughly the same as one of our standard 3-credit courses, which most courses at Penn State are about 3 courses long. That much content. Interestingly, this MOOC, we were relying on one of our rock star faculty, a Nobel Prize winner, regularly testifies to Congress, and you can read between the lines, extremely busy. So we had a fairly large team that supported him. While he definitely was the content expert, we had a lot of others helping him, and I know we'll be looking at that more in a moment. The basic design, though, as is the same case with the 120 courses that our college has delivered online before this, is a text-first approach. We don't like to rely a lot heavily on video and other multimedia because we've conducted and read a lot of research that reveals that's not necessarily a great way to teach. So we used text on the screen as the basis for our courses, and then we incorporate rich media when and where it's appropriate. So this course was not video heavy, is the message I wanted to leave there.
Okay, so great. So I'm just going to put out real quick. Any guesses? And I'm looking at the participant login here, and I see some people that are from Penn State, so you're not allowed to guess. But if you just type in to the chat box your guess of the total amount of hours it took to develop and deliver this particular MOOC. Everyone about 10 seconds. Okay, we got some good guesses coming in. Okay, here we go. All right. Okay, so here comes the reveal. So this was a 3,100-hour effort. Now, in a little bit, I'll be breaking some of these down into their pieces. That's a lot of hours. I think what I'm going to illustrate here is the type of effort that might open your eyes, drop a jaw here and there, but this all leads to the importance of being prepared to plan at scale here. Here's another example, our Epidemics MOOC. This was considered also another very successful MOOC delivered from the College of Science. This was designed to be a very heavy video approach. In fact, it was going to be video and synchronized animations with each of about 61 videos that were included in the entire course. The course was delivered over a period of 8 weeks. So as you can tell, that was just a lot of video effort. So again, and it was 8 faculty members that were involved with this. So it was a lot of coordination. So any quick guesses on what it took to do Epidemics?
Well, they've gotten more normalized now. Now they're coming up with the big numbers.
Honing in on it. Okay. Here we go. This was a 5,500-hour effort to do these things. Again, I'll show you some of the breakdown in a little bit. How much of that was dedicated to just doing the animations included into the video. But this again was a project where we wanted to see how many hours really were dedicated to doing this. Our last example is our Creativity, Innovation, and Change MOOC. This was delivered from the College of Engineering. Again, my group was involved by supplying an instructional designer into this. This design was heavy into engagement. It had quite a bit of video component as well. It was very video-centric like most MOOCs currently are. They had a lot of assignments, a lot of peer assessment, and this was about creativity, so there was a lot of what they call fast-fail approaches to the design and the delivery, and this is the way those faculty members liked it. They want to try anything until it didn't, and then alter course. So one more time, taking guesses as to how many hours it took to do this. All right, so here they come.
All over the board.
5 figures, down to 4. Okay. Well, this one was over 6,200 hours. So again, we're not typically in the practice of tracking every single movement, but because these were MOOCs, we wanted to get a real story and snapshot. We did track quite a bit. Most of this from the design development side are definitely tracked. How the faculty reported their hours involved with these kind of altered somewhat, and we could talk about that a little bit. But these are the things that really demonstrate how much effort goes into these. And I think it's very important then to say, wow, if that's what's involved, we really need to make sure that we understand what we're doing as far as planning. So when it came to these MOOCs, and this is an analogy that Annie and I run to all the time when someone says, well, I want to build a MOOC, and it's akin to walking up to a builder and saying, well, how much for a house? Well, what is the mental image of the house that you're talking about, right? You can have a house and say, well, this is what I consider a house, and then who's going to develop it for you with the time and resources that you may have? I say, well, actually, with what you have available, you can have something like this. And this is something to keep in mind at the planning phases when you're talking about MOOCs, is that, hey, if someone has a grandiose idea and they want to know how much for it, be careful about committing to saying, what you can do. There's going to be a very important period of taking a look at the resources that are dedicated and they're going to be necessary for the type of design that you envision for how this MOOC is going to work. So I just want to reiterate here again that planning is very important. MOOC development, and quite frankly, in all my years of doing e-learning development, both in higher education and in industry, the idea of planning is critical. Some of the processes you're going to see throughout the week can apply not just to MOOCs, but it comes from basic e-learning or online course development as well.
So that's actually a great segue. We definitely see a lot of variation, even among our 5 MOOCs. In my college's 120 online courses, I've got the same variation that we just shared. I mean, it really depends on what kind of house we're building. We wanted to, really take you back, as Matt just said, and think about this as a general good course and learning design process. The process that we tend to use at our institution is one we call, and others call backward design. One of the things that we tend to hear a lot when we're working with someone who's new to developing an online course is, they'll come to us and say, I really want to do this online course. And we say, well, tell me about it. And they say, well, I'm going to teach them this, and I'm going to teach them this, and I'm going to teach them this. And we don't hear, well, what are the students going to learn? The best place to start is, well, what do you want your students to be able to take away from your course? That gives us a much better idea of where we need to head. It's like any trip. You need to know your destination. Nothing is any different when planning these MOOCs. So the faculty who might, or administrator who might come to us and say, oh, I want to do this MOOC and it's going to be all, animated graphics, or it's going to be all video. We say, well, whoa. What is it that you want students to learn through this MOOC experience? The next point on the journey then is, okay, well, now we know where we're taking the students. How are we going to know if they've gotten there? How are they going to know if they've gotten there? And that is, in a learning design speak, in education speak, assessment. How are they going to know? How are we going to know if they've reached the learning outcomes that we've set forth? That, again, is very helpful. I know in Anthony Robinson's MAPS MOOC, his ultimate goal, the big picture goal, was for students to create their very first map. Well, how you're going to know if they can do that? Well, you're going to have them create their very first map. So that set the stage for us. At that point, then, we were ready to focus on the content of the MOOC. What is it that the students are going to need to know or have experienced or practiced in order to successfully do that by the end of the MOOC? And from there, we could back up. That helps us figure out what resources we're going to need. We talk about how we're going to be able to engage participants throughout the process, and it's necessary to know how engaged the instructor is going to want to be. I just had 2 MOOCs that I was working with, but they were 2 very different faculty who were going to be able to be involved at very different levels. That's important to know. And how are we going to make all of our grandiose plans work, regardless of someone's time and regardless of their level of access to the internet? You know, whether they had very low bandwidth access that was all they could afford, all the way up to someone who could, you know, watch big movie streams. Once we figured all that out, we had the pieces in place that would tell us how much time we were going to need both to develop the MOOC and how long the MOOC itself needed to be. Anthony's MAPS MOOC, in my case, ended up being a 5-week MOOC. It was more along the lines of a 1 or 2 credit course that our institution would typically offer, while the Energy MOOC that we developed was going to be more like a 3 credit course, and we wanted 8 weeks to deliver that MOOC. We also knew, looking at the players involved, the kind of MOOC we were going to develop, that we were going to need more time to develop the Energy MOOC than we were the MAPS MOOC. Not only because of the kinds of things we were going to be developing, but the people involved and when they were even available. We take, doing this very seriously and wanted to make sure that we produced a quality product. And so we, and once we announced our MOOCs to the entire planet, we didn't want to have to change and say, oops, we goofed, it's not going to be ready, wait a few months. We ended up actually having to do that with our Energy MOOC, and all was well in the end, but it wasn't ideal. So Matt, perhaps you could talk about the basics of the teams that we put together.
Sure, absolutely. So put together this slide that tells you when you're going to start putting resources together. And for those of us who've done lots of online development or e-learning development, this list looks like the same old to us. But for those who haven't been involved, I put this together for you because when doing a MOOC, you have to think about the type of people and skills that you're going to need in this. So number one, is the faculty member, right? The subject matter expert, the person who has the knowledge that we're trying to distribute. Absolutely critical, very centered to what's going on because this is the content where it's going to come from. Now, these other roles may not look as familiar to some people. Some of you, they will. But what we consider extremely important at the next level of support and getting this going is the instructional designer. There's many definitions of an instructional designer, but they really are a jack of all trades when they go through any type of project like this. So the designer is going to have to develop a relationship with the faculty or faculty members as well as the rest of the team. Then, the other support areas I talk about is multimedia specialist. We want to talk about someone who develops graphics, someone who can go in and create the type of visuals that you may end up needing to support the learning, or some other areas. And there's going to be these kind of other areas of expertise that a multimedia specialist will bring to the table. Programmer, so different levels of coding. I'm not talking about someone who just comes in and writes code, but depending on your technology environment. So for example, at Penn State, we're using Coursera currently as our MOOC platform. In the future, we may move to other ones, but there will always be someone that needs to be in the role that knows the programming level type of things we can do with platforms. For MOOCs, we have the role in here for a video producer and a project manager, editor, and many other roles that come in here. One example that comes to my mind in these possible other roles that you need to think about would be during delivery, if you're going to have a bunch of graduate assistants helping with the engagement level things, such as going in and managing discussion forums. Does anyone have any questions about this slide in particular? This is there can be many other roles, and some of these can be. Some people have to combine. Sometimes a multimedia specialist and the programmer function have to be one person because that's the type of resources you have available.
Well, and I can throw in there too, Matt. Having been an instructional designer before I became an administrator, I worked in places where I was the jack of all trades because I didn't have a multimedia specialist or a programmer or an editor. I had to do all of those roles in support of the faculty member I was working with. I've also worked with faculty who had a lot of those capabilities and really didn't need much help. And then I've worked in environments like the one I'm in now where we have all of those different people, and it really is a team effort where everybody's bringing their unique skills to the table.
Right. And I obviously I experienced the same thing where I kind of had to be doing all of those things. Obviously, there are trade-offs when a project is set up that way, where if you're truly the jack of all trades of some of the responsibilities we show here, they're not going to be what you're going to produce is not going to be very deep in some of those areas. So it's going to be very basic video or very basic programming with little depth into trying some new things. So I think what we're seeing, especially as technology and delivery, basically the development and delivery technology becomes more complex and the options are just expanding almost daily. The idea of having this type of team, these types of resources put together, becomes even more critical than it was just even 5 or 10 years ago. Okay, I don't see any questions, so I'll move on. So I'll talk a little bit about the instructional designer role. It's, again, expectation-wise in planning, expect that instructional designer role to become very central to the project. And, I want to make sure that everyone understands the object in the circle is larger than they appear in real life. The learning designers, I'm just trying to show that they kind of overlap all those different areas. They're going to have to build relationships with each of those areas. Because learning design, whether they want to or not, I put learning designer in here, also instructional designer. There's a small debating community if that's the same thing, but for purposes of today, it is. And they may have to even, I put an area in here where they may have to have a relationship with vendors. They may have to have the relationship with management, and most likely will. Oftentimes in these projects, an instructional designer becomes the de facto project manager when it's all said and done, which can become quite a burden. I don't know, Annie, in your experiences, your team do you guys try to keep it separate from project management from learning design, or your more experienced learning/instructional designers, they become your project managers?
Typically, our learning designer is the project manager, but again, your mileage may vary. One of our MOOCs was developed by a faculty member who had developed many online courses before. So for the purpose of his MOOC, he really served as the project manager. He still enjoyed and asked for some assistance from a learning designer, but the roles were very different than our other MOOC because of his own expertise and experience. Right.
So just, again, like Annie says, that amount of support you provide to that faculty member, it could be, a thin level, or it could be a real, all-encompassing level of, support all the way around to make sure that this thing comes to fruition. It depends on the faculty's comfort level, and their time allocation. Say, look, I could do it all. I've done these things before, but I just don't have the time. So you've got to weigh those things out. I think it's important here, and this goes to just any project, but it's, I call this maybe Project Management 101, but you really, truly have to build a team. Whatever that makeup of that team is going to be, there's going to be a lot of interaction, especially in a project like a MOOC, because when you first take them on, there's a lot of unknowns. There's things you just have not done before. So recommendations around this type of thing wrap around, communicating early and often with this team, because at first people are just, some project, the way they start is that the resources just kind of wait for their turn. They wait for the ball to be passed, to kind of be thrown over the fence for them to do their thing, and then before they throw it back. And I think you want to build a team that is more integrated in that, because that will certainly come in handy later. What you're trying to do is build a team that's truly in sync with each other, because you're going to have to respond quickly to things. There will be things that do not go according to plan. If anyone likes to, when you're doing project management, you're drawing a Gantt chart. Everyone loves a Gantt chart. We all love milestones, and we measure it out, and we're starting with the end date and working backwards and so forth. Well, what happens if you, in a type of a project you haven't done before, and you get to a milestone and you don't have that milestone done. Okay, so your team has to be able to respond to, well, look, we can get past this. Here's what we have to do. And a team that's really synced up is the type of team that can overcome this. So I see some questions coming in here, and I think, Annie, you and I can take some time to look at them here.
I got it.
Yeah. So one question, are these new people to be hired?
And I said, in our case, it was not, we had enough of an infrastructure here at Penn State that if the college developing the MOOC didn't have their own instructional design resources, there were other people in the university, other resources in the university we could lend to them. And Barry, you asked, is it best practice to insist faculty have taught online before attempting a MOOC? Gosh, if they haven't, I think a MOOC would be a pretty scary way to enter the online teaching and learning. So it's not a must, but I would at least want the other people on the team to have had a lot of experience teaching online. One of the things that I found frustrating being on the sidelines when MOOCs started getting a lot of press originally was the number of people writing articles and sharing lessons learned that we had learned so many decades ago in online teaching and learning and distance teaching and learning. They clearly just hadn't had the benefit of people around them who did have that kind of knowledge and experience, and so they were reinventing wheels or reinventing mistakes. So it doesn't have to be the faculty member, him or herself, who's had that experience, but I would at least want people on the team.
And going back to one of the things you mentioned about lending assistants out from across the university, across the institution, Roxanne came back and asked, will that include more pay for that individual? Because that's one of the questions that she sees coming up.
Sure. Yeah, and that's a great question, Roxanne, and I hate to say this yet again, but it depends. We did not, in my college, we developed 2 MOOCs, and we paid nobody anything extra because it's a long story that maybe we'll touch on a little bit, but it was considered part of their work already. They were developing 2 MOOCs that were really going to be driving student interest into our corresponding World Campus programs. So we considered it part of their load. We did hire for the one MOOC for lack of a better term, a teaching assistant. It wasn't what we officially call a teaching assistant at Penn State, where they get a stipend and tuition and so forth. But we did hire one of our graduates to help monitor the MOOC, and we did pay that person a nice amount, but not $1 million.
Right, and I can tell you also for some of the other Penn State MOOCs, the College of Science, none of the 8 faculty had ever delivered online education in any way, shape, or form before coming on board. So our experience there was that there was certainly some onboarding pains that related back to that, let's build a house analogy we had earlier, where they had this vision of building, they wanted Pixar-style animations, because they thought that would be the best way to do it. And our job was to come to them and say, well, here's what's realistic based upon the type of resources that are available. We can come up with a good solution, but it's not going to be that. And it took time for that team, and we consider obviously, all the support and the faculty being one team. It took us all a while to get on the same page, but once we got rolling, our instructional designer really took the bull by the horns and really helped build these relationships, which led to much smoother sailing later in the project. It was fantastic. And I do know that in the College of Engineering, those faculty members did, in their budgeting process, find a way that they were being paid for their work on this MOOC.
So Julie just asked a great question that's a perfect segue. Any tricks for relationship building between these stakeholders?
So this slide I have up now, I think one thing that's important to keep in mind, and there's so much more material out there about building relationships, but I think and especially the instructional designer has got to be the focal point of building that relationship with the faculty and those stakeholders that Julie's asking about. But the tough issue is that the field of instructional design is often not known for anyone that's outside the field of instructional design. So trying to explain to someone doesn't matter until you go through a project. So what has to happen is time and effort has to go forward. You have to build trust before you're going to get that credibility in these relationships, especially with faculty. Faculty are coming in sometimes, with very little experience of dealing with what they consider teaching support resources, and that is, that some faculty, they kind of understand because they've been around it, and other ones don't, and it's a matter of doing things to get their trust before you're going to get the credibility from them, and building rapport and all those other things you want to do. But instructional designers, that number one priority is to really get to know this faculty member, and as well as sometimes absorbing the other members of the project. But when it's all said and done, most likely the face of the support team will be the instructional designer to the faculty team, and other stakeholders. So I always put this in. This is, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I consider this the stages of the instructional design faculty relationship. And this goes back in all my experiences with any type of subject matter expert, especially those who come into a project as you need to give us your expertise because we're going to make this online thing. So I've drawn this where we have a relationship and then the length of time on the project. So the first phase is the project honeymoon, where, okay, this sounds great, we're excited, we're going to do this MOOC and we're going to make an impact for the university and all these things that are going on. And the relationship it kind of has this little bit of a rise, and as everyone gets to know everyone and get familiar with the project and so forth. The trough of disillusionment is that area where oftentimes the support team, and again, the face of it being the instructional designer, is asking the subject matter expert or the faculty member to do possibly more work than they may have expected. Oh, we need you to review these scripts. We need you to write a script. What? Write a script? What do I got to write a script for? Well, it's got to partake, what you have in here. And then if a script gets submitted, then it's all cut up. It says, well, it needs to be cut up into 5-minute increments, and we want to do this type of video. And again, these are things that were just not expected of the person who is providing this information. And it's being cut up in ways that are not, that they're used to, some of them doing a lecture, 50-minute lecture. I take questions, and that's how we do it. So as we go through that part of the project, sometimes that relationship can kind of go down a bit, and this is the part where there's a little bit of, there can be some complaining, there can be some issues, but at some point, there is what I call this click moment, and it's sometimes when the prototype comes together. I've seen it often happen here when you finally see the videos and you see it put into the interface and you see it actually work, that something starts to happen. And as that starts to build up and people start to get an overall picture of how this is going to work, I think this is where everyone starts to get more in sync, and this is where those relationships often really take off, to the point where more often than not I've seen, whether it be a subject matter expert in the pharmaceutical industry or especially here, faculty at Penn State, where it's to the point where I don't want to do any more projects unless I have an instructional designer to do this. In fact, usually it's the instructional designer they've gotten to know very well, and if it's a good instructional designer, everyone wants to work with that instructional designer moving forward. So in fact, our College of Science, 8 faculty, even though we loaned them an instructional designer for this first MOOC, they want to move forward with an entire MOOC strategy now, MOOC 2.0 for the future. But they're like, but we want to do it with your instructional designer. We need her. So this is something I just hope that you can. This is what to expect. The project just doesn't take off and everyone jumps on board and is happy from day one. So yes, there will be some pain points most likely. Again, I'm just trying to set an expectation. And Annie, I think you can chime in that you've had these types of experiences.
Absolutely, and again, this is assuming that the learning designer and a team is leading the project, and if it's the faculty member, it may be the other way around. It's just, your mileage will vary, but this is a good. I love this diagram.
Okay, so I'm going to come back. So the 3 projects that Annie and I have been referring to, the Energy Epidemics and the CIC project. So I put on here the resources and then the hours spent by each. So this shows you these were, these MOOCs are very different, even in the makeup of how much time each resource spent on some of these things. So, if you look at the percentage of time that a project was taken by different areas of it, so epidemics should stand out to you that 36% of it, let's see if I can do my drawing here. So 36% of, no, that didn't work, but of that whole effort was just in the video production. And I can tell you out of those 2,000 plus hours, well over 18, between 18 and 1,900 hours were just on the animation work. So if you happen to have a project and you really want to have those synchronized animations and you're going to do that yourself, expect to spend that amount of time. If you look over in the CIC model, you can see here that the faculty, the three of them reported 2,700 hours between the three of them, which makes up 43% of that effort. Compared to if you look over at epidemics or the faculty for energy, it's not nearly as high. So you can see that the makeup of what the total hours for these projects were, it can be different. So we have the instructional designer hours were only 5%, where over here for energy, and Andy can talk about this 61% of the time spent was from their instructional designers, and I believe there was 3 of them on that. So, some were just much more faculty-driven, with instructional designer providing a guiding hand and some coordination, and other ones were instructional designers and the faculty. They're very well established in the process, and the designers can run with quite a bit of the workload.
Well, and Matt, I'll add one more story to this picture, because these numbers are just in, but the MAPS MOOC, there's a really unique situation where, as I said, we had a faculty member who was really driving the process, was extremely experienced in online education, did want the help of a learning designer, but not nearly to the extent of our Energy MOOC. And now you can add to that very unique story, he also is a skilled videographer. So he did his own video and audio, and the quality was phenomenal. I mean, I can do my own video and audio too, but you wouldn't want to see it. It'd be terrible. So his numbers, when we added up the time that he spent, one learning designer, several programmers, because he did have some unique mapping needs, and some delivery help, it was only 1,000 hours all together. So again, it goes back to that house analogy. It depends on the house and how skilled your different subcontractors are.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. It's point on. So Roxanne asked a question about that, that I think faculty should take a MOOC before they create one. I think that's a great idea. I think we did have a number of our faculty on the 5 projects did take a MOOC beforehand. I'll even go further. We had our, instructional designers and multimedia specialists. We had some of those team members go in and take a MOOC as well. That really helped build a framework to think from and talk from as the kickoff of the design meetings got going, as to experiences they liked and did not like, and things they'd like to do different if they were going to do it on their own.
Yeah, that is such a key point, Roxanne and Matt. Everyone involved should take one first. I took several. Full disclosure, I didn't finish them, but I signed up for a bunch, and I did, as I would call, cherry-picked, and I learned a ton about, and this is as an experienced online educator, I learned a ton about what to do and what not to do.
Yeah.
And you're right, Chris, it's the same as developing any good online course. Absolutely.
Yeah, I joked, Andy, that when we delivered this the first time, I said, we could just take the word MOOC out and just talk about, learning or online course development. It's very, very similar. So now there are things that you hear in the delivery portion that become very interesting. Because this is delivery at scale, and what are we starting to find out about it? There are some lessons learned, but this process, yes, I totally agree. So again, well, speaking of that, so the expectations, and you're looking at the breakdown, we looked at the hours across the projects, and basically, yes, again, when you're developing some type of online course, especially in MOOCs, we found that 85% of the effort is spent in the development and 15% is in the delivery. I mean, that can vary between 15 and 20, or maybe even a little bit less, but most of that effort is going to be in the development. And strategically, the way we're thinking here, and most anyone will when they come up with something like this, is that you want to get the biggest bang for your buck. So if you're going to invest X amount of hours or dollars, if you finally translate to what that is, the delivery is the cheapest part of doing this. So you want to do that as often as possible if you continue to look at what you're doing, and if you're getting things out of it that you find interesting. And of course, there's tweaking that you want to do with your content between sessions, but delivery becomes much cheaper every time you do it when it comes to online learning. So, and I just put in here that for anyone with experience knows that this effort consists of all the planning, design, meetings, production, and the work that goes on for development. Delivery becomes its own animal in MOOCs, and it's very incredible. And I can't wait for everyone to see that session on delivery and hear what faculty are learning during delivery. I think it's incredible. I think it's probably the hottest thing in MOOCs right now, is we're starting to discover how faculty are becoming very engaged and thinking about pedagogy because of the delivery of these MOOCs. But I will save that for that team later this week.
Well, and just one more plug, the faculty member that led our Maps MOOC and the faculty member that led our Energy MOOC are going to be part of that presentation for MOOCs by Design, so that'll be a treat. Yeah,
and so Andy, you talk about a couple of advocates, especially Anthony from the Maps MOOC. You talk about an advocate of delivering MOOCs and being excited about pedagogy like no other. And he was an instructor who's delivered online courses before, but his experience in the MOOC, he said, was by far the best professional experience in his career, which was mind-blowing. And to listen to him talk, it's amazing of the different types of things to think about.
I think we're going to turn just to the value of the project timeline. So we've talked about how much time this takes. And some of this, again, we've talked about how this is just good common sense for online course development. And some of this, a lot of it is good common sense for project management. So, some of this may just seem totally normal or common sense to you, and that's good. Like the design process, when we looked at our own project timelines for each of the 5 projects, we worked backwards. We knew exactly what we wanted to do and estimated how long we thought each component would take, and then we worked backwards and set up our intermediate delivery goals, that way. As I mentioned before, it was important for us to remember, and the rest of our stakeholders at the university kept reminding us that the world was waiting. The minute we advertised these MOOCs and said they would launch on X date, it wasn't like the online course that we, develop and offer for the first time, where maybe 5 students or 20 students sign up, and if something goes horribly awry, it's 5 or 20 students we have to disappoint. We're talking about disappointing 35,000 people or 100,000 people. So we really wanted to be conservative in our time estimates. We wanted to make sure we had enough time to develop quality materials. We knew and had to recognize that expected and unexpected things would happen. April Millay, who's joining us today, was the lead learning designer on our Energy MOOC. And April was pregnant, and her baby decided to come just a little earlier than we planned. So, life will happen. And you also have to recognize that the platform, the provider you are delivering your MOOC through may have some of their own timelines and things that they'll dictate, and that certainly was true with Coursera. They were good. It was good to keep us on our toes, but you have to factor those things in. You do, as I said, need to expect change. Your delivery date should more or less be solid, but know that other things are going to move. We knew, for example, April, I'll pick on you again, we knew April was going to be going on maternity leave. We had to plan for some backup, make sure that we had people lined up. She was incredible on having detailed notes and action lists so that she could make that handoff. The horrible joke we make in our office about so many things is, you could get hit by a bus tomorrow. So you always want to make sure that everyone on the team knows where everything stands and is ready to jump in if there's an emergency. You need to recognize what your critical tasks are going to be and be ready to add extra resources to them. We were constantly asking one another, not even within a MOOC team, but across MOOC teams, and we'll talk about this more in a minute, but we would have regular university-wide meetings with other MOOC teams saying, how are things going? Do you need help? How are those Pixar-style animations go? What do you need? A really solid team, a really interconnected team, you can pull each other through the rough spots. Where I know, just again what Chris was saying earlier about this being a lot like any online course, the people who try to go it alone, maybe put an ego in there and say, I don't need anybody's help. That's where we see the problems. Be open to help, be open to communicating with others. And also recognize that the faculty members' time, and I will say that actually we should say any team member's time, may not match your ideal production schedule. People get sick, people go on vacation, people have babies. You're not necessarily going to all be there when each person needs you to be. So you've got to have some flexibility.
Annie, let me just give an example of the faculty, plans not matching production cycle. So for the Epidemics MOOC, there were 8 faculty members, and with scripting and so forth, when it finally came together and with shoot schedules, it was supposed to be, we'll do it in July and August. Well, that became a challenge because many of them are just not around. So that was an important milestone, obviously, to have some videos done. So again, our designer, the entire team worked with the faculty to come up with some very creative scheduling to get some of these videos shot, but it took a lot more time to do that type of coordination than we ever expected up front. It took weeks of time to make sure that just around when someone was going to be there.
And exactly like any kind of course production that involves more than just one person, the other common thing you'll hear me say is, your problem does not become my emergency. So, we had to make sure that team members understood that they were part of a team and that it wasn't fair to miss your deadline and then expect someone else to work over a weekend or work evenings to pick up the slack. That's just not fair. I mean, emergencies do happen, but that should not be the norm. So let's move on and look at budget. We did talk obviously quite a bit at the beginning about building that house and how much money is it going to take. And again, just like online course development, traditional, as we joke, traditional online course development, it varies widely. It depends on the house you're trying to build, how many people and how the level of experience of those people and so forth. With our MOOCs in our college, we really had to look at what was our goal. In our case, one of the leading goals, not the only, but one of the leading goals was to help drive interest into our World Campus program. So for that, we kind of looked at it as like a marketing expense. How we were going to pay for it, well, that was relatively easy. We said, well, if we can get some students to sign up for our tuition-generating World Campus program, that will help us offset the faculty time and the team time and energy that went into developing the course. That answer may be very different. The Science College of Science MOOC, I know they were very interested in using the MOOC as a way to attract future graduate students to their program and get the creme de la creme to be excited about their on-campus master's and PhD programs. Well, maybe that will ultimately translate into more research dollars being generated by those campus-based programs. There were still others. Our creativity MOOC really didn't have any of that. They had some grants and some self-funding by the faculty that, you know, they just really wanted to do this for their field, for the good of society, and they weren't as concerned about recovering costs. So, you know, these are things, we can't answer this for you. It really depends. It's things to think about. But do look at what your different line items are going to be and what your big ticket items are going to be. Again, Matt shared the example of the group that wanted the Pixar style, you know, very professional. And well, that's great. And we could do it. We found a company, I believe, that could have helped with that. But we also had to show them what the sticker price was going to be. And is it really worth it? And, you know, that's where learning designers can come in handy, because we love pulling out research and examples that we've come across before that show kind of the cost-benefit analysis. Yeah, there are a lot of things that are really cool to do, but are they educationally beneficial? Are they gonna be worth the bang for the buck? Video and things like the Pixar style animation, those are really hard to estimate. So those are places where I know at Penn State we were lucky. We had a lot of people who could help us think through and do some cost-benefit analysis. That's where, you know, at like places like Coursera, there are whole online communities of people at all sorts of institutions around the globe who are also working with Coursera. You could reach out to them and ask them for some of their experiences. You know, maybe you've seen a MOOC that you participated in, you love the style. We have found that other institutions have been more than happy to share with us, you know, general estimates of how much it costs them to produce the kinds of things we've seen in their MOOCs. So, you know, that's really, really very helpful. I think next we wanted to, and we'll come back to some of these things, but I know I don't want us to run out of time before we get through some of the points we wanted to share today. We did talk about communications. You know, within our institution, the way we handled communication among our teams about anything from budget to design and development strategies and needs. We set up a lot of different communication methods to keep ourselves in touch with one another, to keep ourselves accountable, and to really kind of form a community. So just a few examples that we did within our institution that you may find worth replicating if you don't have them already. We did have that MOOC strategy group, that ad hoc group I talked about earlier, where we pulled together people from around the university, faculty, staff, administrators who were interested in exploring MOOCs. We kept that group together to present day. We're constantly sharing, you know, what are you experiencing? What are you going through? What's the new hottest thing we ought to be looking at? Those kinds of things. We also had MOOC meetups. I loved those. Those were really fun. I'm sure that we could have done them more regularly if we could pull everybody together. It was hard. But basically, you know, saying, hey, all 5 MOOC teams, want to all get together next week for like an hour and a half and just go around the table, talk about what issues we're running into, what resources we need from one another. So, you know, kind of like that MOOC strategy, but these were it was restricted, so to speak, to the faculty and the learning designers and the other team members who were actually doing the work and comparing notes. We also had a couple times when the instructional designers themselves, without everybody else involved, got together. Again, most of these folks were in kind of that project management role as well, and so just comparing notes with each other, they found very helpful. And then we did things like have a MOOC research symposium where, you know, there was a lot of interest, not just from the MOOC teams, but other faculty and grad students at our institution wanting to do research around our MOOCs. So getting those people together in a symposium format to share notes, see who was doing what, who might want to have help, who might want to collaborate, and so forth. So, that was all equally important to the communication process. Matt, you want to talk a bit about some things to think about that we thought was worth sharing?
Sure. Again, these MOOC platforms are coming out, so anyone that has experienced instructional designers and have developed processes and tools and tool enhancements and so forth through the years, when you come into the current MOOC platforms, it is like taking a step backwards. It's almost like to the back before Dreamweaver days and so forth, where it's a little bit messier. But these MOOC platforms have emerged on the scene so fast, and what they had to do was put some type of UI on these things so that other people could use them other than programmers and engineers. And really that's the phase they're at right now. So those meetings that Annie was talking about when the designers got together, a lot of that was, I can't get this quiz to stay blank and so forth. So yes, expect a bit of a frustration curve with whatever platform you may use. You'll see more of them over the next year. If you have an experienced team, they'll say, "Oh, this is very difficult." If this is all new resources, they may not know the difference, and they're like, "This is what it is." But that's just something you need to think about. You also need to think about, as you get into production level type things, think about all the different media assets you're going to develop, and think about all your version control issues. Think about storage of these things. We had an incredible opportunity to use an implementation of Box.com here at Penn State, where especially the Epidemics MOOC, I don't know what we would have done without that, where we can store media and have conversations about that media, make comments, request revisions, make notes that the revision is done, all in there. So, and then go back a couple of levels and talk about, just even before production happens, scripting, versions of scripts. I recommend, this is me personally talking, I recommend avoiding the passing around of Microsoft Word documents with the version control on, the comments. Figure out better ways to do those types of things. So that can become very messy very quickly. So if you already have some systems in place, that's excellent. You may need to tweak them for this type of project. If you don't, you'll have to document them as you create them, but you will have to do it.
So let's take that one step further. Things to think about. Nope, that was good. That was good. You can go back, Matt. And talk about, Chris brought up earlier that this is, sounds like a lot of things we already know about online teaching and learning. So we wanted to focus a little bit on how this is different. Obviously, again, an institution like ours has had, we've been doing online education since the beginning of online education. That said, though, there were still some really important differences to doing a MOOC. Certainly the goals were different in some respects, and we talked about those different goals in the beginning about everything from a marketing goal and using a course as a way to a free course as a way to draw interest in a tuition-paying course, better and exciting ways to engage alum and people new to disciplines, things of that nature. The platform, though, was also incredibly different for us. We've had a lot of experience using online course delivery platforms, and yet using Coursera was extremely different for us. As Matt said, those very experienced to online learning management systems at our institution would joke that the 1990s wanted their learning management system back, but the reason, our learning management systems that we are used to, they can't scale like Coursera can. And so it was really important to recognize that, it didn't have all the features that we were used to, but, good grief, if it did, I don't know how many millions of programmers it would take to make the kinds of things we're used to be able to scale the way that Coursera could. So, managing expectations of our faculty and designers in that respect. The stakeholders certainly were very different as well. It was amazing to me, as someone who has been at Penn State for almost 21 years and have been involved in distance education that entire time, to see all these new faces and positions at Penn State suddenly poking their nose into what we were doing. It was fascinating and acting like we'd never been doing it before. And that was within our own institution, so pretty interesting. There was an increased concern for quality. It really fascinating to see that, again, you know, if a brand new course has 5 students or even 100, that's very different if things go wrong than if they're 30,000. You know, we said if things go well, they're going to go really, really well. And if things go wrong, it could be epic failure. And certainly we've seen some institutions, I won't name any names, but who unfortunately ran into some speed bumps early on with their MOOCs, and no one remembers what MOOC it was. No one remembers the name of the faculty member necessarily. They remember the name of the institution. So we really knew that, you know, we were putting our neck out there. A lot of concern about the technology, making sure every single thing we did was going to work and work at scale. You know, we obviously were lucky to rely on Coursera's experience, but we also were trying a lot of other things like online mapping software that Esri provided for our Maps MOOC that we had to make sure would also scale to 35,000 students. We had a lot of concerns about accessibility and access in general. Learned very quickly that our YouTube videos that we had embedded in our course were not easily seen by students in China and some other countries. So that was, you know, gosh, we thought we'd made things very accessible, and they weren't. And we have a lot of experience with accessibility here at Penn State. We had a lot of external interest about the outcomes of our courses, which was fascinating. A lot of people at other institutions wanting to do research on our work and contacting us. That was really different. And in general, the need to be culturally relevant. Yes, our college, our small college within Penn State, has 120 online courses, and we do have students around the globe. But honestly, most of those are expats. You know, they're Americans working and studying abroad in the military and elsewhere. We haven't really, honestly, had to worry as much about the cultural relevancy of our courses and the examples that a faculty member might give or the slang we might use. So this was a great opportunity for us to be better about that. I don't have there we go. Next, so administratively, I just wanted to give you a sense of an administrative perspective that some of those differences meant for me as an administrator at Penn State. You know, I've been asked over and over again, what advice do you have for people like you when they're working with peers? So here's my top 3. They need to understand that teaching and learning online is not new. And even MOOCs are not new. They've gotten a lot of attention in the last couple years, but there are a lot of things that we know, best practices for teaching and learning at a distance in general and online in specific, and online at scale even more specifically, that we already know. So they shouldn't be reinventing wheels. They shouldn't be acting in a silo. They should reach out to their colleagues, both within our institution and elsewhere, so that they don't repeat unnecessarily potentially mistakes or do things the hard way. They also should know what resources that we do have at our institution, what resources are already available in communities like the one, the Coursera Partners community and other MOOC platform communities. You know, there are a lot of people and resources you can reach out to. And I'm so glad that some of you raised this early on this afternoon, that they should, before they do anything else, they should familiarize themselves with MOOCs. They should sign up for them. They should check them out. They should see what it's all about. I was involved with a meeting recently at our own institution, a group that is interested in maybe doing a MOOC. And it became clear as we asked how many of you in this room, in this large group, have been part of a MOOC before, and nobody raised their hand. And I see Roxanne says she's completed 5 all the way to completion. You should get extra brownie points for that, Roxanne. Perfect. Yeah, we definitely, you know, don't go into this blind. See what they're like. Your mileage will vary. There are great MOOCs out there, and there are some pretty terrible MOOCs out there. So don't just sign up for one and make your decisions or your lesson learned based just on that one experience. So that's definite words for administrators. In terms of what questions administrators like me should be asking of the faculty that they work with or other administrators who are thinking about doing MOOCs, again, my top 5, you know, the first thing I ask is, why do you want to do this? And I will tell you right now, if I get any kind of a sense that they're doing it just because they think it's cool and shiny, not a good reason. Not a good reason. This is a lot of work, as we've shared this afternoon. Any course development, even if it's in a face-to-face classroom and it's one faculty member, it's a lot of work. You don't do it just because you think it'll be cool. You want to ask and consider how it's going to fit in with your own strategic plan of your department, your college, your institution, maybe the faculty member's career goals. You need to consider what resources will be needed, where those resources are going to come from, and what role this individual you're speaking with is planning on having in the development and the delivery. It might sound like a great idea, but you know, if you don't want to be making work for others unnecessarily. I mean, is this individual willing to put up their own sweat equity in the process, not only in developing it, but in delivering it? Those are important discussions to have. Looking at, again, we talked a little about this in the beginning of our discussion today about how we selected MOOCs at our own institution, and Matt and I thought it would be worth sharing a little bit more of that with you. Again, just to see if this would be helpful in your own thinking at your institution. We are now using, in our vast experience, we've settled on a 2-part proposal process. So we now have faculty and staff, administrators who are interested in doing a MOOC. They have to submit a short proposal. And all of this information is online at weblearning.psu.edu, and Brad's going to type that into the chat area. You can see the actual proposals. There's a short proposal that helps us kind of vet and weed out the people who are only interested in the cool and shiny from those who are maybe more serious. That gets reviewed by members of a university leadership body called the Online Coordinating Council, and includes a place where deans, department heads, and even learning design support units have to kind of sign off so that there's some evidence that this isn't just one person's great idea. You know, you want to make sure that they thought through and had help thinking through all the resources that will be needed, and as I joked earlier, aren't promising someone else's effort without their knowledge. If courses make it through, proposals make it through that initial process, then there's a second lengthier proposal where they have to put a little bit more meat on the bones. They have to do a longer video clip to show, if they're going to include video, even minimally, you know, how that might look and how it might come across. How they're going to assess students, examples of that, how they're going to try to engage MOOC participants, and examples of that. A bit more rigorous, again, reviewed by this university leadership body. And then ultimately, we have a steering committee that oversees all online teaching and learning that our institution does, and they're the ones who make the final decisions. That body is made up primarily of deans and associate vice presidents, and they put their final stamp of approval, because the rationale being, this is ultimately going to be looked at as the university. Again, nobody remembers usually the name of the faculty member or the MOOC that didn't go so well. They remember the institution. So we want to make sure that our highest levels are supported. And if the MOOC is going to have any kind of credit or prior learning assessment associated with it. We have normal university processes and procedures that any credit-bearing course has to go through with our faculty senate and our graduate school. Those are automatically part of the process. I mean, we use our standard processes when and where appropriate. So we're still learning a lot, but we just went through our first round of this two-part proposal process, and it went pretty well. We learned a bit. We adjusted timelines. We recognized that repeat offerings of MOOCs, we weren't thinking ahead enough and hadn't made that a speedy enough review process. You know, so a MOOC that's been offered once and wants to be offered again, we had to speed that one up a little bit, shorten the proposal because this was a known quantity. Things like that had to be adjusted. Matt, I want to turn it over to you to kind of wrap us up and talk about the kind of support that we have available here and, again, to get people thinking about what they might have at their own institutions.
Sure. So, you know, at Penn State, we're still kind of formulating our overall MOOC strategy, but one area we're taking a lead on right now is the type of support we can provide to those that are moving forward with designing and delivering one. The number one asset I think we have here is we have a very large learning design community. That is a community of learning designers, instructional technologists, and so forth that goes across the university, all the way from our resources at the World Campus to all those at the individual colleges, such as Annie's group at the Dutton Institute in Earth and Mineral Sciences. So we have a very good community there. They can lean on each other, and we also kind of, you know, we recognize the types of resources that are out there and continually, you know, doing some professional development type things to help propagate that. Specifically, we're developing a Coursera onboarding format. Basically, we're using a Yammer group called MOOC Development. So as teams come on board, we have a specific team that helps them get them through the roadmap of getting started with what they have to do to get a course on the Coursera platform. You know, what are those deliverables? We can help them get that going and, you know, set up their, you know, they want to end up at the place where we're open for registration, and we are fast tracking that and learning how to do that. So I think that's an important area to think about. Video production, we've used our WPSU video facility. They've come in and offered specific support for developing videos for a number of our MOOCs, and we're going to look to continue that more strategically. We also have new video production capabilities popping up on campus. Recently, our team in Education Technology Services had last year started something called the One Button Studio, which is for students to go in and basically hitting one button, they can record a video. We want to expand that so that faculty can do the same thing. It's not just for MOOCs. This could be for, you know, flipping classes and other things that faculty might be interested in doing. In fact, I can paste in the One Button Studio.
Got it. Oh, you did? I was just going to do that.
Look how fast I am. Yeah. So, and as we move forward, we're also trying to collect how can we get these MOOC communities of practice. Annie alluded earlier to the MOOC meetup, which we thought was critical for getting everyone through that first year, where it was teams of the learning designers, all the other support members of the team, as well as faculty, in a way that faculty can talk to each other about what they're learning. And then the MOOC strategy group Annie talked about earlier, that kind of group is migrating to something else. But those are things that I think your institution, as you start to get into it, you start thinking about communities and best practices and the type of sharing you want to do, whether it's related specifically to MOOCs or other areas in online education. I think it's absolutely critical to think that way. So, real quick, some of the takeaways I'm hoping people will have here. Number one, more time than you think. I think we spent a lot of time illustrating that at the front end of this presentation. I'm talking not thousands of hours, or not hundreds of hours, but thousands of hours, which is really illustrates the importance of planning these types of things and making sure you have the right resources. You know, making sure you have the right team. You know, I know everyone's in a different place with what they have available to them, but if you can think about these things, you can start to strategize the type of team you want to put together. The importance of relationships. I can't tell you how many relationships have been built just in the MOOC initiative at Penn State alone. The different types of conversations we're starting to have just because these different types of people have come together to talk about this. It's not just how much, but how are you going to do this? When we talk about budget, there could be different ways. Annie talked about certain groups using grant money, and other colleges were just given certain budgets. But it's going to be important to figure out how you're going to distribute and allocate the resources for creating this. And something else is, don't go it alone. As groups get into this, continually seek ways to build support. It may come from unlikely sources. It could come from other institutions. I know here at Penn State, Annie gets approached all the time by other universities, as do I. Love having these conversations because basically I'm learning more than I'm actually distributing. So I think those are the main takeaways we want you to come away with. Personally, I think that there's some unexpected benefits we're seeing from MOOCs. I think the thing that I did not see coming was faculty, after the fact, or as they go through the delivery of the MOOC, how they are just really engrossed in some of this engagement to where they are thinking pedagogically about how do I bring that same engagement, which I enjoyed so much in my MOOC, how do I bring that to the classroom? And the fact that they're thinking that and asking those types of questions is starting to create some new conversations, not just in the MOOCs, but just around pedagogy and what we can do in the class and even technology. So it's a very exciting time. And I just want to thank everyone for being here today. We're open for questions. I see some are popping up over here.
Matt, Roxanne is wondering how many faculty in general at Penn State, not just with the MOOCs, what's kind of our uptake on the one-button studios?
That is a great question. The one-button studio is for the use by students right now. So yes, faculty come and say, hey, I'd like to have my students use this one button for these particular assignments I have. But for the most part, that use is for students. So for example, one-button studios are not currently designed to have a teleprompter because we're trying to emphasize that students are going in to present. They need to know the content well enough to present on it. If we're going to have the faculty one-button studio, we would have the ability to have a teleprompter in there, even though every subject matter expert I've ever talked to at the beginning of a project when they're going to be on video says, I don't need a script. When they get on camera, the little red button goes on. It's the Bobby Brady thing, or whatever Brady it was, Brady Bunch, where the red light and the camera goes on, they just clam up, or something doesn't go right. So it's a great help to have that type of thing, and that should be going online in a couple months here at Penn State. So as far as percentage of faculty, I don't have that information. The One Button Studio site may have some information on its current usage statistics, though.
Oh, good, because I had promised Roxanne that you would know.
I'm not the One Button Studio guy per se, but it's funny because I was just up there Friday checking it out.
I must say it's awesome, but it is funny when you talk about a script. I know Anthony Robinson, who, as I said earlier, did his videos by himself because he's got that talent. He's a very skilled videographer. He said that I would probably be absolutely purple in the face if I could have watched his outtakes. Just all the times he goofed up in the privacy of his own basement and had to start over again. And he was working from a script. So, any of.
Oh, yeah. I just, I've been at companies where we have taken executives and we created a blooper reel of that stuff, and we use that sometimes as a precaution. Said, listen, this can happen. So, yes, for sure.
Well, to put a good plug, as we got a couple more minutes, I know. So we'll hope that more questions come in if you have them. Might be a good time, and Brad will probably do this. I think just put a little plug in for the remaining sessions this week. They'll be awesome, and obviously we've given you a lot of an overview in talking about the planning process, and we've shared some stories with you that started to get into design and delivery and so forth. If you have the time to join those other sessions this week, they are going to be so informational. I know I have learned a lot this week. We did them internally, a few weeks ago, and they were awesome. So I'm sure learn a lot more from those folks too.
So are there any other final questions that are coming up? If you want to type them in the chat. I've got one question that came up earlier that Matt in particular get your input on, because Annie responded to the question in the chat. Someone asked, Julie asked, were there any tricks for building relationship between the stakeholders involved in these MOOCs? And Annie responded, communication, communication, communication. But were there any tricks or were there any learning experiences you had related to bringing herding cats, bringing all these individuals together to work on this large project?
Yeah, for one, the rest of the week we'll have a number of our instructional designers that can talk specifically to that, and I'm sure they'll share plenty of their experiences. But some of the things that we talk about doing when you can certainly feel when the seams of a project are being stretched because of miscommunications, and you can't just say, "Oh, what we're going to do is we're going to have a meeting as soon as possible." One thing is, I know this sounds simple, but picking up a phone and having a quick conversation can be effective. I know that, especially since I've come into higher education, the phone is rarely used because so much depends on email, and everyone's got so many different things they're working on than a specific project. But we noticed that can be effective in shortening up a communication gap immediately. Other tricks are figuring out different ways. That MOOC meetup group was important because that was a chance to break bread with people. I mean, we would have bagels and just a general sense of sitting down and eating and just hanging out in a very informal atmosphere. But the sharing that went on in those meetings was fantastic. And every faculty member, every MOOC that was kind of ongoing at that time, their experiences were helping to shape the next MOOC. Those faculty that were sitting at the table, listening, going, we have to do something like that. Otherwise, our experience is not going to be that effective. So, do as much personalization as you can. Obviously, the other things around getting to know, especially that particular faculty member, in the project by an instructional designer or other people on the team, and then having the teams spend time working together. Physically be in the same space doing something.
I'm going to jump in right if I can. Kim just asked a question that I want to talk to, and gosh, you're at Duke. You've had tons of experience with this. Yeah, you're right. She asked, how many reruns of a course do you find that, does it take less time for the repeat offerings? And I wrote back and said, well, yeah, definitely dramatically less unless they want to totally revamp the MOOC. And she wrote back and said, yeah, we find many instructors want to do heavy revisions. So, again, your mileage may vary. The other thing, though, that I wanted to throw in there, one of our experiments in wanting to do the Energy MOOC, we knew that we were going to develop an online course for our world campus that was going to be identical. So part of that experiment was, can we develop the MOOC and then with very little effort turn it into a smaller, Penn State credit-bearing course? Honestly, the answer, it's going to take a lot more than we thought. We'll have the core content, but the Coursera platform was so dramatically different than we use Drupal for our content management in our college, and then we use Angel, which is owned by Blackboard for the learning management side. That is also dramatically different from Coursera and how Coursera kind of dictates, as any learning platform does, how you present material, that it will actually be a lot more work than we thought to put that into our own system. So and that's without, the revamping that the faculty member might want to do.
So it looks like we've addressed most of our questions. And we're up against our time. So I want to first say a huge thank you to the participants today. You've been very engaging. We appreciated you being here. And as Annie mentioned, we hope that you'll be able to join us for subsequent sessions throughout this week. Today was just our first session on planning Tomorrow at 3 o'clock, same time, same place, we will be having a discussion on design, followed by on Wednesday's session on development, Thursday's a session on delivery, and Friday we're going to wrap it up with a session on evaluation. So for today, I think we're going to be wrapping it up, and I want to put a huge thank you out to Annie and to Matt for their presentation today. I think that they've really helped us get on the right road for this week and help us understand how to get on the road for developing MOOCs. Also want to thank Steph and Jim, who have been helping in the background here with me, and also to the TLT, the Teaching and Learning with Technology unit here at Penn State, for helping bring this event together and for providing resources for all of us sitting here today. So with that, thank you very much. We hope to see you throughout the week, and have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon.